They're using educational purposes, social construct.
Thank you.
As part of our air that we breathe, but that is often quite invisible to us, not all of us, but to some of us. But it's important that it can go on while we're sleeping, while we're fighting for justice, while we're doing whatever we're doing. I'm going to lay out for the first, say, almost 2/3, but a little bit less, maybe half of our time, the big bones of the project. What are we doing? Why have we structured it the way we've structured it? What are my main concerns? What are the issues at stake, sort of big picture? And then we're going to drill down to a very specific case study, which Sam is going to present. So the goal here is to say, here's this big picture. Well, how does it play out on the ground? How does it play out in a way that helps us understand
They're using educational
how it's impacting
purposes.
everyday lives?
Structural racism
Okay?
is the topic.
You with me? Okay, if I
Carmen's
go too
Kitchen.
fast, which I am known to do because I am from
We're on
New
another
York and
safari.
everything
What's in the
fast.
oven, bartender?
Because you have to. Please holler. I tell students to just
Structural
frantically
racism.
wave, and it works fine for families and parents and friends as well. So feel free to do that. Okay, I'm going to start with the definition because of course you can't really talk about structural racism if you're not sure what you're talking about. So what is structural racism? Before we can figure out how it works. So this is my operative definition. There are many. They share many of these traits. And the basic definition is that structural racism in the United States is the normalization and legitimization of an array of dynamics, historical, cultural, institutional, and interpersonal, that routinely advantage whites while producing cumulative and chronic adverse outcomes for people of color. Now, these words are long, and the definition may seem long, but it's important because they're key. If you look at there's a couple of key words before we move along. Normalization. Normalization means that structural racism is built into the everyday practice. We're not talking about exceptional behavior, individual bad attitudes. We're not talking about the occasional negatively intentional policy. We're really talking about a process that happens in a normal, everyday way, that goes on as part of our air that we breathe, but that is often quite invisible to us, not all of us, but to some of us. But it's important that it can go on while we're sleeping, while we're fighting for justice, while we're doing whatever we're doing. Legitimization is important because we legitimize institutions, and I'm going to talk later about how this happens, that are actually functioning in structurally racist ways. The outcomes are clearly producing dramatic, cumulative, and chronic adverse outcomes, and they nonetheless have quite legitimate.
I hear her talking about racism, right? But we know we got black on black, white on white, Chinese on Chinese, Mexican on Mexican, everything on everything, right? So because that's usually where crime originate, right? It's usually from your own community. It ain't like somebody else coming to your community, because how they gonna get in there? You ain't gonna let them. Police gonna pick them up, or it's gonna be a gang in that community to, like, not protect that community, but protect their turf. So usually beefs start within their own community. You know what I mean? So it ain't like, but in the whole, when they talking about racism, they trying to say that it's a white and black thing, but I don't see it as that. I see it as it's a systematic structure, the way that the laws is made, the way that the Constitution is made, the way that they doing it with the paperwork. You know what I mean? They ain't doing it with the one-on-one. They doing it with some police brutality, but it ain't so much a whole bunch of, everywhere you go, somebody saying nigger or a honky or a Chinaman. Ain't nobody doing none of that. You know what I mean? The only way they do that is, is road rage or some shit like that. It's got to be a trigger. But ain't nobody just walking around and racist against everybody. And if it is, they hiding it. That's my point. But the system ain't. The system is openly doing their racism. And what I mean by that is more, I don't even call it racism. I call it dictatorship. I call it majority rule. So the majority is making all the rules. So if they make the rules in favor of themselves and then make the rules to hold other people back, then that's what I say that ain't fair about. That's the type of racism I'm talking about. the systematic racism, the system, not just the people, not just black and white, not just the color thing.
To me. They have a lot of legitimacy. This is not something that is marginal, again, and on the side. The second piece of the definition that's really important is that structural racism is not just the past that has a legacy.
I mean, because then they can indoctrinate you like with them fake ass rap songs. That's putting a spirit in you. That's like brainwashing you, the kids, to think and feel and act a certain way. That's like racism, because it's like you putting all of these thoughts in their mind instead of just letting them just not figure things out for themselves, but kind of like figure things out for themselves. You telling them what to think and how to feel and all that with the damn rap songs, and in the public school when they got the sex education and they come in with all of this pornographic new literature that's just teaching kids how to make babies in kindergarten and all that. So that's another form of, that's the type of racism I'm talking about. I'm like, they just programming people's minds like they was in the Matrix or something, like we was all robots and we getting programmed. That's systematic programming. That's the type of racism I'm talking about. That's the most dangerous racism. Somebody walking up to you and calling you a nigga ain't gonna turn you into a damn gangster rapper serial killer. But that rap song will. But somebody walking up to you just saying, "What's up, nigger?" That ain't gonna do nothing but just probably make you get up, cuss his ass out or something. But that ain't gonna brainwash you.
That's waning in the present. It has present formulation, so it's historical, yes, but it's also present tense. There are cultural elements to it. That means it has to do with the way we talk about
even religion. You know what I mean? So no matter where you're born a Catholic, you're born a Judaism. You're born in a Baptist. You're born in a Methodist. All that is just like people is just in their little baby prisons. Now they stuck in them little mental prisons. That's what a construct is. A social prison. A mental prison. You think in a certain way and you stuck. And the only way to get out of it is to think for yourself. Make your own decisions. And that's what I was talking about as far as like, to let kids figure certain things out and then give them the opportunity to pick what they want to be. Just like they're giving them gays the opportunity to pick whether they're gay or not. Give kids the opportunity to pick what religion they want to be, to pick who they want, what their job they want, all how they want to think, what music they want to listen to. Don't just make it to where it's like this is all they tell them that this is all you got, so you got to follow this. No, that shit might be dangerous and deadly just like it is, and get everybody put in either locked up or in the graveyard.
Race, that help produce it. It's not just policies. But it is
baby mental prisons
and policies. We
social
see it in government
constructions.
Policy. We see it in corporations and their policies. We see it in educational institutions, and of course it is also interpersonal. And by interpersonal, I don't just mean sort of screaming people at the Walmart, which seems to be a new problem we're having in the United States. But it does mean that, right? Because that's part of it. But it also means the ways in which we interact and the ways in which we create relationships with one another. So our project is really, it started as many things in my life academically have started, which is something that seems like I should be able to do it quickly and then takes like forever. So this is one of those, I can just explain structural racism to everyday people, doing a multimedia project with a couple of videos, put them online on YouTube, pull up a website, do some research, bam, we'll be all set, 6 months. Okay, 2 years later, we're standing here in front of you like really still working it out for a lot of different reasons, but we feel more and more convinced about the importance of the project and the importance of these areas. So what's happened for us is that we're trying to focus on these 5 critical areas where structural racism is highly dynamic and consequential. There are others, so don't even worry about asking me that. So what's happened?
Housing, education, mass media. See that fake ass Lil Nas effect. That rap shit. That shit is dangerous. Nigga. They should have a warning label on that. On some of them programs on TV. Wealth and jobs and criminal justice.
For us is that we're trying.
That is the jobs, the criminal justice. They didn't put everybody out of work. Told everybody if you want a job, either join the army or the police force. That is the job. This shit is like Russia. It's more like communism, where the government control everything.
To focus on these 5 critical areas where structural racism is highly dynamic and consequential. There are others, so don't even worry about asking me that. There are definitely others than these 5.
How is this free trade? How is this a free trade society? How is this a free society when you paying all the motherfucking taxes, when you paying all the traffic tickets, when you paying all these motherfucking mortgages, when you paying all the insurance for your car, everywhere you go is another damn. This is more like economic sharecropping to me. It's like everybody's a sharecropper for the government, if you ask me, because it's like every 5 minutes they coming up with another tax, or they coming up with another ticket to give your ass for even riding a skateboard in the damn street, even going fishing, even going hunting. You get a ticket for any of that shit if you ain't got a license or something. So no, hell no. Everything is like they say oh, if you got $1 you could do that, but it ain't the dollar. It's more like a dictator. It's like somebody saying, hey, you got $1, but I'm finna charge you for. You ain't gonna have $1 when I'm finna charging you for the quality of life. Because if you without $1, you can't enjoy the quality of life. You can't be participate. Not without $1. So, and then even if you do got $1, the quality of life ain't nothing, because we tell you what the quality of life is and how and what's legal.
But these 5 really apply to all of us in here. Hopefully not criminal justice, but if not, then that may itself be part of the puzzle.
The quality of life.
If you've never had a brush with the law. But the others for sure.
It's based on $1 bill, then it ain't no quality.
Wealth and jobs are just.
It's just a baby prison.
Anchors. The
a mental
in
prison.
These areas determine.
That's why I say freedom is a lie. Freedom is just a word. Freedom can't set nobody free. Freedom is fake. Even with $1, you still ain't free, because they tell you what to do with it, and they take as much as they want. So ain't no such thing as freedom. This is more like economic sharecropping. They just brainwashing motherfuckers, selling them dreams, just like them damn politicians do. Once they get in office, they don't never, that shit don't never happen. So that's all this shit is. It's just a way to buy time and shit, hold you off, and then make you go to sleep and forget about everything you was waiting on and asking for in the first place. You just got tired of waiting and asking, and they got what they wanted. Nigga, they told you a lie. You thought you was gonna get it, and you never got it.
Fundamentally, the quality of life, the sense of safety and security, and the opportunity that our citizens in this country have.
Except on the TV set.
So I want to lay it out this way for a moment, because this is usually how we talk about it. We talk about wealth, we talk about housing, we talk about media, whether it's representation, images of people of color or African Americans, which is what we mainly focus on, whether it's educational outcomes or the criminal justice system. We tend to look at these things in isolation from one another. And this is not a bad idea when you want to drill down, because if you want to look at the significance of, say, racialized wealth inequality, which is dramatic, and I'll point that out in a moment, you want to figure out why and how, so you have to go down and into it, right? You have to keep moving in more deeply. But at the same time, it's extremely important to think about how these gears, as we're thinking of them, work together. And they are actually not operating in a single circle, that there are interlocking effects. And this is key to our argument. This is key to our approach, that we think about how various aspects of society produce structural inequalities in ways that are interdependent, interactive, and compounding. And this is extremely important because, again, if we find a disparity in, say, job discrimination or unemployment, there's a tendency to say, well, if we just fix that, we're good, right? But if you look at the interlocking effects and you come to the realization.
But how? Just like I just said, it ain't no shortage of no white folks. Them white folks ain't out of work. Them is the new white folks that's out of work. They just got here and immigrated earlier. Because them white folks that been in for a couple of 100 years, they didn't already establish themselves. Because they had time when everything was cheap and before everything went up and before the government put on all these laws to stop them from doing everything to acquire what they had to do to acquire their wealth. Now they got a whole bunch of laws and all that to stop you from doing that. But back then, them white folks didn't experience that. And they didn't have no competition because they just passed laws that kept the black people out of their jobs and out of their trades and put them in prisons and shit. So they didn't have no competition. So all that shit. So the same thing they doing now. The reason the black people is staying stuck is because they keep bringing new immigrants here and giving them the jobs and shit. The same thing they did with the white folks back in the day. And after a while, after they run out of jobs, then them few little immigrants that's left over, they look like they poor and shit. They stay in the same position as the black people and talking about, what you talking about? We poor too. That's a damn lie. Y'all motherfuckers just ate up everything. Y'all just overpopulated America like y'all did and everywhere else in the world, China and everywhere else. What you talking about? This ain't y'all. Y'all overpopulated everything, and now ain't nothing to eat in this motherfucker, and ain't no place to stay in this place, and you drove up the prices, and now you seeing all of these people who was originally born here living in the streets because this is an illegal occupation by a foreign it looked like foreign country or some shit. So that's what happens.
That in any one sphere, you have
that's why the people staying stuck and ain't
past,
moving.
Present, and in policy and in thinking.
Every time
and it's really driving.
We get ready to move, you bring somebody else to take their place.
In other areas, you can't possibly think in a
Every
single
time they get ready to grow, they bring somebody else to keep them stunted.
Sphere way to solve any given problem that we're dealing with. So we're making an argument that it's not just structural.
And now they're turning into cannibals and got to eat each other.
Ways, but it's interlocking and interdependent.
Because when you're starving and you got to eat, you got to eat.
This whole
you're
talk
hungry.
could be statistics of data, and we're not going to do that.
This
I'm
is
going
economic
to give you
deprivation.
Just a thimble.
But they calling this shit cultural, structural racism.
To these issues.
But it's economic deprivation.
Probably at 7:30 in the morning to come here to listen to me.
I don't want to hear this lady no more. She ain't talking about shit. She's just saying some big ass words.
Very quickly. Black unemployment today is worse than it was in 1964, but more importantly, it hovers at twice the white unemployment rate pretty much all the time. And I want to draw your attention very quickly to the Great Recession, when unemployment rates for whites was around 9 or 10, sometimes 11%, and it was a national catastrophe, crisis. How can we survive 10 or 11%? Well, black unemployment hovers at 12 to 15% all the time and was 19% during that recession. So if you want to figure out how to survive that crisis, we have people to talk to. Schools. School segregation has gotten worse since the early 1990s, and that segregation is driven really by housing segregation, which I'm going to talk about in a moment. But what's important too is that due to a variety of structural conditions, largely in housing and elsewhere,
man, schools was always based on wherever the hell you live close to, that's where you going. And they ain't gonna ship your ass to no motherfucking good white school anyway if you a black kid. They gonna send you just to another ghetto, some little neighborhood school in somebody else's neighborhood, so you niggas get in a gang war. So I'm gonna hear that shit about segregation. They ain't gonna segregate your ass to no white or Chinese school. They gonna send your ass straight. They gonna send the black people to black schools. They gonna send the white folks to white schools, Mexicans to Mexican schools. And the Chinese to Chinese schools. They gonna segregate that shit like that. They is not gonna send no motherfucking black folks to no motherfucking white schools. This is a baloney.
The more homogeneous a black school gets,
They're gonna be, and if they do send you there, the people gonna have a grade requirement to where you gotta have a certain grade requirement just to get into school. Like if you was going to Lowell or something in San Francisco, one of these prestigious schools, high schools or something, they consider you gotta be gifted. Nigga, you ain't even getting in there, so that's a lie. Talking about they segregating some shit. No, they ain't, motherfucker. They making this shit where you gotta compete for something. That ain't no damn segregation. That ain't no equal opportunity. That's a damn competition. And it's more like racism. It's more like discrimination and depriving you from that opportunity. Because how the fuck you gonna get the opportunity if they don't ever give you the opportunity?
and the less white it gets, the poorer it gets. So race
And
is
then
an
keep
indicator also of
overpopulating
economic
America and then blaming it on, oh, it's just your people. Oh, it ain't. You motherfuckers ain't helping the people that's already here. You bring in somebody else that already got all the knowledge, and then they looking like they doing good, but before they got here, they was already trained to be scientists and shit.
disadvantage as it plays out in schools.
They
and
fucking parents are
criminal justice
scientists.
is a huge sphere. We could talk about many things, but there are a couple of key things. One is that for the past 30 years, we have quadrupled the number of people in prison, mostly from drug arrests. Number one, blacks are jailed at 6 times the rates of whites, despite the fact that whites use and sell drugs at a
mental
higher rate.
illness.
I know you may find that hard to believe. If you follow mass
Nigga
media
tired
and
of
news
being
reports and the sense, you'd think that all African Americans do is
isolated.
sell, buy, and consume.
Nigga tired of being kidnapped in a foreign country and trying to figure out how to get up, how the fuck he became a prisoner of war. And so he trying to escape that shit by using some drugs. And then so he's selling them to use them, and then they going to jail because it's illegal to use them and to sell them.
Consume drugs in the United States. So if
But
you
he really
actually think about the consequences of this, this would mean that we couldn't have,
got a
if we
depression.
followed who's actually doing the drugs, we couldn't possibly have the disparity that we have. But we have a policing process that confirms and looks for and seeks out and finds the drugs that...
Because everybody ain't no damn drug dealer, man. Some people is drug users. So everybody can't see everybody that use drugs as a damn dealer. And so that's the fucking problem right there. They don't see them as mental health issue no more. They don't see them as they see everybody as a damn dealer. And they don't see, then they ain't even asking, well, why is all these people using drugs and why are they depressed like this? Because then they got to look at the system and say, and admit that the system is worse than it was even back in 1865 after they let the slaves go. You know what I mean? Because now y'all got all of these drugs.
That we're looking for in segregated neighborhoods.
Now y'all got
and then
this
another
secret
key point is that
racism.
we do not sentence blacks and whites for the same crimes equally. Blacks receive longer sentences for the same crimes, and this is on top of the fact that whites are not likely to be charged with crimes in the first place. So that longer sentence plays out even more significantly.
Yeah, you ain't ever
Wealth
gonna get
is a massively significant
What?
component of the process of
you
structural
running
racism.
shit.
But just since the 1980s, the black-white wealth gap has quadrupled. And the gap at this point is roughly $11,000 in wealth for African Americans.
Why they keep talking about the white folks? What about all these new immigrants y'all brought over here from India and China and Philippines and Afghanistan? Them motherfuckers was rich before they got off the boat, lady. Remember, they come from oil countries and shit. What the fuck is you talking about? And that high-tech shit is buying up all Silicon Valley. Now they buying up San Francisco and raising the fucking prices on everything. Why you ain't talking about them rich motherfuckers? Why you talking about these broke-ass white folks that's about to get exterminated in America and sent to jail, prison with these niggas after they run out of money?
to 142K on average, the median wealth for white families. That is a staggering gap that no amount of hard work will breach. It just simply will not be closed with hard work.
Anyway, what white
Key
folks?
points to keep in mind.
Polish, German, French, Irish. What fucking white folks are you talking about? Because there's a whole bunch of them. Welsh, Belgium. I mean, which white folks are you talking about? Because they don't consider themselves white folks. They got their own country, their own nationality. So I don't know how, just because you get to America, you turn everybody into a damn cartoon or something up around this motherfucker. All of a sudden, when you get to America, you ain't your country no more. Like if you from Uganda, no, you just black. Or you from China, no, you white. You from Mexico? No, you a white Mexican now. You did, because they can't call you black, nigga. Your skin ain't dark. Whatever your skin color is, that's what you is. You either black or white. Once you hit America, you ain't Chinese, Arabian, and none of that shit no more. You are white now, and that's the way it is.
About structural racism overall.
Only one got left out was the black folks.
You do not have to be aware
They can't
of
pretend.
any of these factors in order for the system to work.
They can't trick nobody.
Two,
Their
it's
skin too
fueled by
dark.
and relies on racial ideas and stereotypes to perpetuate outcomes. And this is important because I'm going to show how the way we think about race and those stereotypes we activate and the unconscious bias we activate actually produces the outcomes in the material world. And whether, and this is important because changing policy by itself won't change necessarily what's going on unless we tackle ideas. And they matter because they really hide structural racism right in front of us. And I'm going to give you an example. And the most important thing, though, is that we can know ourselves to be unracist in every bone in our body and still be functionally deeply advantaged by this system and participate in it all the time. This is a difficult thing to really confront because we've talked about ourselves as Americans as having transcended this kind of racial outcome and investment since the 1960s. That's been our main story, that we're now a meritocracy, that we've ended structural barriers, that we're post-race.
No, they ain't. They just hiding them better.
Like a weird old school fantasy that we
They
thought.
just got better at hiding it.
I know. I didn't believe it when it was said. I saw this kind of thing coming. It was like, oh,
Worse
no,
than
this
it was.
isn't gonna be pretty. But what did most people think? Oh my gosh, we've got one
Now it's
African
illegal.
American, sort of. We
normal.
have half an African American in the White House. How exciting, and this month everything's gone. Structural racism, poof, magic. But discriminatory outcomes do not have to rely on racist or discriminatory intent.
What do one motherfucking man got to do with the whole motherfucking community? He just because they said let him be a fucking actor don't mean everybody else could be an actor.
So how is structural racism made invisible? The first is this obsession with the illusion of meritocracy. Now let me first say that the fact that we do not have a meritocracy, in my opinion, does not mean that people don't deserve good jobs, that they haven't worked hard, that they're not smart. It means that the system is structured for some people's hard work to matter a lot more than other people's hard work, and therefore it's not a functional meritocracy. If the meritocracy is that rewards in society go naturally to those who are the best performers, and that positions or achievements of individuals depend on...
Bullshit. That ain't what happened to America. What happened to America is over-integration. They brought all these motherfucking billionaires from India and China and everywhere else and let them buy up every motherfucking thing and buy up all the fucking politicians and start changing the laws in this motherfucker and then put everybody else out of work and brought this fake-ass damn demic and all this other shit and got motherfuckers one foot in the penitentiary and one foot in a goddamn mental hospital, and how can one motherfucker with a $20 an hour job compete with a motherfucking millionaire or billionaire who done brought his whole fucking goddamn community over here and bought up all the fucking property, and then now they running shit? How one motherfucker, when that one motherfucker need, now he gotta go to them to get a job? See, that's what happened. This is bullshit. They brought over all these high-tech billionaire motherfuckers. They turned this to a high-tech place. Now everybody is like they fucking slaves and shit and working for them on this motherfucking sharecropping plantation. I'm telling you, we like sharecroppers.
Their abilities and effort, and does not.
You gotta take what you can get and shit, nigga. Beggars can't be choosy when somebody else got more money than you. Big money take little money, right? So they just come up and buy you out, buy up all your shit, and then now you can't even afford shit. I ain't talking about the person who just sold something. I'm talking about the little motherfucker who ain't got nothing to sell in the first place. He gonna be left out. Because the prices is gonna be too high. Everything gonna go up. Inflation.
Not depend on class, race, or other group advantages, then obviously we're not a functional meritocracy.
Because there's too many people that want the same thing.
We do functionally fail, and this is very important.
And it ain't enough jobs to go around.
It is the myth of this meritocracy that actually helps drive our.
That's the type of racism I'm talking about. The invisible racism.
So. Inside of the meritocracy myth is the belief that we ended racism with the civil rights movement. Lawrence Bobo, a political scientist at Harvard, has done lots of attitude studies, and one of them shows that over 60% of whites think that we've reached racial equality now. It'd be like right now.
If I
TikTok
can't get
still,
a job,
right now.
who gives a fuck
And
if you smiling at me talking about, hello, how you doing
So
today?
that's 80%. Well, it's a little
Man, you
higher,
know how I'm
actually,
doing.
going down
I
to
need a
these
motherfucking
numbers.
job. How you doing today? And you don't really care.
16% of blacks think that we've reached racial equality, but a 32% think we're going to get there, which just speaks to the hopefulness of people of African
Your
descent.
words is...
Because there's not a ton of evidence of us getting there soon. I told you needed to have
ignorant.
caffeine for this situation, right? I did warn you. I gave you a heads up. It's not pretty data. But this perception really matters, because if we believe that racism ended with the civil rights movement and we're mostly just cleaning up a few kind of leftover vestiges of these problems, then when we find deep disparity, right, it contributes to alternative explanations. We don't say, oh yeah, structural racism, because it's not in our parlance, it's not our understanding. We come up with various types of mechanisms to compensate. One of my favorites is the anomalies. Well, yes, over here, but I know a guy who hired 5 African Americans. I'm like, oh, that's fantastic. Are we going to solve this one man's job hiring program at a time? I don't think so. Or a one bad apple thesis. This comes up a lot in police, right? That, one bad cop, some evil bad cop, as if he could function without a whole culture around him to enable it. So what remains? If it's the case, this is not the case, but this is a false proof I'm setting up. If no or few structural impediments exist, then why do we have such disparate outcomes? The answer becomes behavior, and this idea that individual behavior or collective black cultural practices produce disparate outcomes like this across all major aspects of society. This activates and relies on a deep well of stereotypes and bias. You guys following me? Am I going too fast? Excellent. You guys are perfect Brown students. All right. So let me give you a quick example. Unemployment rates, labor force, Census Bureau, 2010. I told you before, it's often twice. Here's your evidence. 8.7% for non-Hispanic whites unemployment, 12.5% for Hispanics, 16% for blacks. It was 2010. That was a little bit higher than your average because it was 2010. If you recall, that was not a pretty time. But it's pretty much
Remember, there's more Hispanic people than it is black. So, them is misleading. That 12% out of their whole population might be 3 times as many as that little 15, as that big number that say 16% in the black population. So if they got 3 times as many people as black people, then you can see where the problem is, nigga. It ain't enough to go around. It ain't got enough to do with no racism. It's got something to do with supply and demand. It ain't enough, like I said. You seen it said 12% for the Mexican people and 16% for the black people. Well, it ain't that many black people. And them black people, they count might be from Africa, the Caribbean, or any motherfucking where besides America. So
bubble, as I said it always is.
That
How do we explain it? If you're giving
that's
a
3
structural
times as many
analysis,
people.
you're going to explain this by looking at housing discrimination, which is there are many, many studies. And
Competing
if we were approaching
for the same
this as
thing.
my own 50-minute talk, I
Same
would go
job.
into some of these. But there's tremendous evidence for significant hiring discrimination, even at entry-level jobs. There's profoundly limited accessible opportunities based on distance,
at the border,
transportation, and
bartender.
housing segregation and isolation, and social networks. Almost all jobs are social networks. I know a guy, which is a Rhode Island thing, but everybody uses it. I know a guy who can do that. Oh yeah? Well, you trust me, so you trust the guy I say. So ask what percentage of white social networks constitute black people? If you're white, what percentage of your social networks is black? Shout it out like the kids.
0.
5%. Anyone? Give me one more number.
0.
30%. Very optimistic.
0.
Amen. That's the number. Do you do math? Because that came out as perfect.
Yeah.
Well, you have what I call intuitive math.
0.
Which is what I have. I don't have real math either. 1%. 1%.
Was I wrong? Was I wrong? I said 0, nigga, and they didn't figure it out. Well, no, we got a few motherfuckers like Obama and that they put up there and act like, hey, y'all can make it too, and y'all niggas ain't going nowhere. 1%, nigga.
Okay, that's rather significant. But what do we hear all the time?
All you gonna get is that
now,
dream.
All of these stereotypes
Another one of them
apply
speeches
not
and
just
shit. You're gonna be
African-Americans.
waiting and shit. Santa Claus ain't. It's gonna be 12 o'clock. Santa Claus
Not
still
just
ain't showed up.
African-Americans, but they specifically get reinforced around black people and black culture. They're lazy, they don't want to work hard, that lacks discipline, lacks proper values, prefer handouts. Paul Ryan's report on poverty made this argument consistently and all over the place. It didn't say that there was any kind of discrimination, only behavior. So I want to move to the question of crime because it's important to understand how pivotal and what a linchpin the idea of African Americans as fundamentally criminal drives a variety of spaces and circumstances.
Once you get to the slaughterhouse, then they can really program you in that motherfucker. You might come out that motherfucker missing some marbles.
A report by the Sentencing
the slaughterhouse, the baby
specifically looking at
penitentiary.
perceptions of crime and the ways in
Public
which
school.
It produces not only criminal justice outcomes, but other kinds of outcomes. And I want to just draw your attention to the fact that I'm talking here about conscious stereotypes and unconscious bias. These are two different spaces, but they're both important. So there's things people say that they think to be true, and then there are things that we don't even know about. 80% of our brain is completely inaccessible to us, and I don't know what's going on down there in that basement, but it's pretty heavy. One of the things going on is a deep belief that black people are more criminal. And this starts really with the moment of emancipation. As soon as slavery ends, during slavery, black people are not criminal, but magically, as soon as they're free, they're pretty dangerous and problematic. Well, recent studies, though, show that whites overestimate the actual share of burglaries, illegal drug sales, and juvenile crime committed by African Americans by 20 to 30%. This pattern is confirmed in widespread implicit bias research. Media crime coverage reinforces this bias. There's many, many reports that show that the way black criminals are portrayed, the emphasis on crimes that are more likely to be done by blacks but not by others, produce a reinforced relationship between black people and crime in the psyche. It's reinforced by higher sales and status for movies, music, and art that revolves around African Americans' criminal behavior and character. My own work on hip-hop, I talk a lot about this, that artists that don't talk about being a gangster do not sell as well. And it's not just because those stories are more exciting, it's because they fulfill a conscious and unconscious sense of authenticity about what black people are really supposed to be. And it justifies draconian policing policies, and most important for what I want to do next, it drives housing and schooling decisions. So I don't have time to go into this at the depth that I wanted to, but this is, if you take the housing gear, you will see that there are lots of policies, past and present, that have had a deep impact on what we have always seen in the housing arena, which is significant segregation and significant economic disempowerment. And I would love to give you an hour-long lecture on all of these, but I want to just very quickly focus on, for the moment, the pivotal nature of a process called redlining. How many of you know what redlining is? Excellent. I don't need to spend a lot of time on it. So just for the sake of just a couple of key factors here. One, it was a government policy, New Deal, so Democratic, so don't get all grumpy if you're a Democrat trying to blame somebody else. Democratic policy, meant to help communities be funded for housing, was racially specific, and was a corporate collaboration, because this was a homeowner loan corporation founded by the government. Color-coded, created a system. Why we call it redlining is that neighborhoods that were considered red and a red perimeter around them were neighborhoods.
So if you didn't have a government, you couldn't get a loan, and you'd be like saying, what I mean by that? They didn't have, black people didn't have no rights until 1965, nigga. So, you know, it's like they didn't have no right to get all these loans and shit. No, you was just like you was in another country. You was like make it the best way you know how. You know what I mean? Somebody you gotta be begging for a job and shit all the time. You gotta make it the best way you know how, man. You gotta, because the government is not your family. The government was white folks' family back then. Remember, they wasn't. You come up there tomorrow, I need a loan. What, nigga? You better go back to Africa and get a loan, nigga. You ain't got no government. What government?
Where any black people live, even only one, were marked in red, given the lowest rating on the system, and ruled completely ineligible for home or business loans. This goes on. I'm born.
You ain't from Chinatown. You ain't from Mexico. That's why they so successful. They got their own government. They don't even need this government. In fact, this government owed China money, nigga.
Long enough to say
they got their own shit, nigga. Like the Italians say, we got our own thing.
Uninterrupted. And this is just one piece of
it. They're their own government.
Creating a number of factors that are extremely important. Not only is it starving black communities of economic resources, it's elevating the whiter the community is. It's creating a financial incentive for white homogeneity. You following me? This is very important because it itself produces thinking about race. Because you're like, well, whiteness has value. Oh, that's right, here's my white house. Basically, in my white neighborhood, in my white schools, it's more valuable. Of course it's more valuable. It's more important, it's more valuable, and you've got a reciprocal process. So let me just this is the most important thing I want to have us think about today, is this relationship. So redlining and other strategies that maintain segregation, they choked off the value of any investing in black communities and suppressed the value of property. And in fact, gentrification as we know it today is impossible without the history of redlining and the destruction of value in poor communities that they themselves should have been able to access, but can't, and now others find the prices to be so cheap because this process has been going on. So it created black ghettos by redlining and constraining and segregating neighborhoods and creating asset reduction in those communities. It reinforced associations of blackness with poverty and struggle in community, artificially raised the value of white neighborhoods and a higher market value, which in turn fueled educational inequality and segregation. As we all know, we fund, for those of us who still send our kids to public schools, it's another racial and class effort to create segregation, but taxes fund our educational units, and therefore if you have higher property values for your house, you have more money for your schools, so there's an incentive to pass this on intergenerational wealth through education alone, not to mention passing on these homes to our children, which does what? Fund their college, weather financial crisis, weather health crises. If you don't have excellent health coverage for some reason and your child is doing, some entrepreneurship, right? You can cover their health. You can pay for it by second mortgages with that wealth gap that we talked about. $11,000 in assets to 142 on average. So it rationalizes, I'm moving down to this one, it rationalizes white protectionism, protecting white neighborhoods as safer and profitable. It makes fear of black people financially reasonable. It stigmatizes neighborhoods that are diverse, no matter how safe, friendly, or stable. It fuels white self-segregation and white flight. So I want to talk for a moment about white flight because I'm going to skip that slide. Because it plays out over and over again. It's not just a past and fixed creation. It's a pattern that we find reproducing itself. So this is going to come up in Sam's presentation. So I want to just very quickly show you that this whole logic, the perception, the bias, the history, the structures, the investments in whiteness have created a context in which 20% functions as a tipping point that initiates the process of white flight. If you're living in a neighborhood that's less than 20% black, whites will move into that neighborhood, fewer than 20%. So that's a good thing. But any more than 20%, and the first thing that happens is whites stop moving in. So it could be 22 to 25%. They did a tremendous study. This comes from a book called American Apartheid by Massey and Denton, two very distinguished sociologists who won many awards. If it's more than 30%, whites sell their homes and move out. As you can see, if you think about this, this process creates segregation in and of itself. So it doesn't take long that when whites stop moving in, other people have to, somebody moves in, it ends up being non-whites, the neighborhood eventually becomes all people of color. So this process can happen individually. People make their individual choice, but what happens? They actually produce it. And that means there's a deep investment in not being caught in this bigger than 30% neighborhood, because we know what the economic consequences that the market produces will be. So as you can see here, just in this brief schematic sense, that this is a normalized, legitimized project that happens historically and interpersonally and institutionally that routinely advantages whites by providing cumulative and chronic adverse outcomes. Now what Sam is going to do today is share a specific case that we worked on together to explain how this plays out on the ground more specifically. And because we're running out of time, I won't tell you his fantastic pedigree, but I'll tell you in the Q&A. Please join me in welcoming Sam Rowe.
Hi everyone, good morning, and thank you, Professor Rose. So Professor Rose just gave an overview of the theoretical framework for this project. What I'm going to do now is show how structural racism works in the context of a life and a community, the Zimmermans. And it may really have been one, but Zimmerman's behavior
Started
embodied
the big skate on black men who looked suspicious. 2011, Zimmerman.
So you have a neighborhood which has been made fragile by the financial housing sector, and one that is made additionally fragile because
They
of the
say if
market
20% of the neighborhood is black, the white folks
sitting
start
right
moving
on
out.
What for whites is that crucial 20% racial tipping
So they
point,
pissed off.
a point that activates white racial anxiety. And in Zimmerman, you have a resident who has been operationalizing this racial anxiety, who also has an intimate knowledge of the racial dimensions of housing values thanks to a career spent in
They
real
say
estate
too many
and work
black
for a
folks
mortgage
was
company.
living in my white
He then
neighborhood.
volunteers to be the captain
The
of
next
the
thing you know,
neighborhood watch, and so the
Chinese
black
and
teenager
Mexicans
walks
gonna be
into
moving
the
in.
community
We gotta go,
on
Margaret.
Sunday.
Pack your shit.
Zimmerman
We gotta go.
pursues Trayvon in his car and then eventually gets out and confronts him, even though the police dispatch he called specifically instructed him not to approach Trayvon
That's
at all.
who Zimmerman was.
Zimmerman chases Trayvon, and when he catches him, the two of them struggle, and then Zimmerman shoots and kills Trayvon Martin. He admits this to police immediately when they arrive. Trayvon is unarmed, and it's clear from the 911 transcripts that Zimmerman instigated the encounter. And yet, Zimmerman isn't charged with any crime. Police take his statement and they let him go home, and it's during the 6 weeks that Zimmerman goes uncharged that this killing becomes national news. It wasn't just that Zimmerman shot Trayvon. It was that he had done it, admitted to it, and then been allowed to walk. Why did Zimmerman go uncharged for a month and a half? Well, there are a lot of ways that the killing of black people has been excused and legitimized, but one reason was that Zimmerman was able to invoke a new Florida law called Stand Your Ground, a law that was created in 2005 with the support of the NRA and gun retailers, and is now law in some form in 33 states. Stand Your Ground basically extends what's called the castle doctrine. Since basically the beginning of its existence, the United States has had the castle doctrine, as in a man's home is his castle, which is adapted from English common law. It essentially says that if there's an intruder in your home, you're allowed to kill that person even if it's possible for you to escape. A century ago, Judge Benjamin Cardozo, who later became a Supreme Court justice, described the castle doctrine like this. A man, quote, if assailed at home, may stand his ground and resist the attack. He is under no duty to take to the fields and the highways, a fugitive in his own home. What Stand Your Ground did was widely expand the castle doctrine. Under Stand Your Ground, anyone who's attacked anywhere he or she is lawfully present has, quote, no duty to retreat and has the right to stand his or her ground and meet force with force, including deadly force, if he or she reasonably believes that it's necessary to do so to prevent death or great bodily harm. So, before, the castle doctrine allowed lethal force to protect people inside their own homes. Now, in states that have passed Stand Your Ground, we allow it wherever someone is legally present. Your castle is now anywhere you happen to be, and your reasonable belief in your own danger can justify killing another person. But is this reasonable belief standard race neutral? Let's look at some of the data. This chart shows how likely it is that a killing will be deemed justified based on the race of the shooter and the victim, using white-on-white killings as the zero baseline. So a black person killing a black person on the left is less likely to be seen as justified, and a black person killing a white person is far less likely to be seen as justified compared to a white person who kills a white person. But as you can see from the data on the far right, when whites kill black people, they're 2.5 times more likely to be seen as justified. And in Stand Your Ground states, which is this tall purple bar, that number is even bigger. Whites are 3.5 times more likely to be found justified if they kill a black person instead of a white one. Put in the language of the law itself, white-on-black killings in Stand Your Ground states are significantly more likely to be seen as stemming from a reasonable fear, the kind of fear that George Zimmerman invoked when he chased, confronted, and killed an unarmed Trayvon Martin. Now, legally, Stand Your Ground was not supposed to be part of Zimmerman's defense at trial because both sides agreed that the details of the physical struggle between him and Trayvon made the law inapplicable. But it didn't need to be in order to serve its purpose. The media talked so much about Stand Your Ground as a mitigating factor, and the defense used the phrase stand your ground repeatedly during argument. And so it appears that jurors whose racial biases were no different than anyone else's were confused and apparently used the racially inflicted logic of Stand Your Ground anyway. After the verdict, one juror told CNN that the jury did acquit Zimmerman in part because of Stand Your Ground, which exposed a shocking misunderstanding of the law's role in the case, but a keen sense of its role in our society. And one of the tragic ironies of this killing is that while Trayvon fell victim in Sanford to one kind of criminalization, he was actually there in part to escape another kind of criminalization. Trayvon didn't live primarily in Sanford. He lived and went to school in Miami, 4 hours south. The night he was killed was a school night, but Trayvon was in Sanford with his father because he had been suspended from school and didn't need to be back in Miami the next morning. The suspension that led Trayvon to stay in Sanford with his dad was his third of the year. His first was for tardiness, his second was for writing the acronym WTF on a locker, and his third was for possessing a bag that had marijuana residue on it. Now, this might seem to you to be cut and dried. Trayvon broke the rules and so he was suspended, and his suspension was often cited in the media as proof of troubled behavior. But it's quite a bit more ambiguous than that. Crop High, Trayvon's school, has detailed guidelines for which offenses warrant which types of punishment. Now, these guidelines themselves are quite draconian, but even if we set that aside for now, it's
Nigga had
clear
a
from the
bag with
details
some
of Trayvon's
marijuana
suspensions that he was
residue.
treated unfairly
I don't know what
even
that
by the
means.
school's own standards. On the table behind me there are 3 columns. The left is Trayvon's offense. In the center is the punishment that offense warrants according to his school's own guidelines. And on the right is the punishment that Trayvon actually got. As you can see, Trayvon's first 2 offenses shouldn't have resulted in suspensions at all. For his third, he got the maximum suspension for an offense that appears to be one of the least serious drug offenses possible. So, by punishing him
10
excessively
days for
and
some
against the
residue on
established
some
rules,
weed.
his school created a pattern of offenses
God
which
damn.
then snowballed and justified a
What kind of
stiff
fucking
penalty
school is that?
for the one actual offense. Now, the tricky thing about looking at structural racism through the lens of one student's
was
suspensions is that there's obviously a lot of ambiguity and subjectivity.
He had just told
We
dudes,
can say for sure that Trayvon's first two suspensions
You better
weren't
chill
warranted,
out.
but there may be additional context
Instead,
we
they
simply don't
wrote him
know
up.
about. But when we put Trayvon in a larger context,
Pissed him off
we see
more.
some worrisome patterns. Since the 1970s, the percentage of students suspended from school has doubled, and black students have been suspended disproportionately. Today, black students are suspended at 3 times the rate of white students, and twice as often as Latinx students. The most heavily suspended students are black, male, and disabled. And black students aren't just over-suspended, they're also judged more punitively for the same exact behavior when compared to their peers of other races. In Okaloosa County, where Crop is located, roughly 50% of school arrests involve black students, even though they make up only 12% of the school population. At Crop High, Trayvon School, specifically, the data is similar. Nearly 50% of Crop's suspensions are given to black students, who account for only under a quarter of the student population as a whole. Trayvon's suspensions were discussed ad nauseum in the media, but almost always as legitimate, and an examination of his character, not an examination of the school, its policies, and his treatment by the adults around him. This is one of the key ways structural racism works. It posits that racial disparities are the product not of systems, but of black individuals' behavior, and then primes people to search for evidence of behavior that can account for the disparity. This erasure of the workings of structural racism and the use of behaviorally focused racial stereotyping was present in all of the other issues I've talked about today. Let's take a quick look at some of the headlines from stories about the case to get a sense of the pattern. NBC says Trayvon Martin suspended from school 3 times. New York Magazine says FBI sources say George Zimmerman isn't racist. USA Today, Trayvon Martin, typical teen or troublemaker. CBS, George Zimmerman used a racial slur in a bar. And the New York Times says defense in the Trayvon Martin case raises questions about the victim's character. All of these headlines draw our attention to questions of individual behavior as a way of explaining what happened, and they draw our attention away from important racially discriminatory forces and perceptions. What I hope I've conveyed today is that Trayvon Martin's death was the product of much more than what People magazine called a chance encounter. It was the product of structural racism in 3 key areas. In housing, it was the product of racialized fears about crime and neighborhood prosperity. In criminal justice, it was the product of a legal logic which legitimized killing and demonized the victim. And in schools, it was the product of the racially targeted application of draconian school policy. The micro-level, interpersonal details of these cases, of course, do matter. But the way we've explained what happened to Trayvon Martin hides how structural racism works and the damage it does. Thank you.
That what life is essentially is not a place to attain happiness or even to aim for happiness, even though you should be grateful if some comes along now and then, but a call to something like adventure. And I think that's the proper way of conceptualizing it. Certainly, if you go watch a story, a movie, you read a book, something like that, if you encounter a narrative that's gripping, whether it's a romance or a classic adventure story, then the element of it that's gripping is the adventure.
Great use in
So to
educational
portray life as
purposes.
an adventure in romance
Farmer's Kitchen.
and in the world is the proper way to portray it. And the way that you facilitate the adventure is through encouragement. I had a client once, I really liked him. He was a good guy, he was a smart guy, good-looking young guy, had everything going for him, you know. He was a good musician, he was a talented athlete, but he hadn't been encouraged, I wouldn't say. He told me about his relationship with his girlfriend. He said, his girlfriend wanted to go biking around southern Ontario. She was about 19 or 20, and he thought he might join her, and when she went and talked to her parents, they made every provision possible to help her prepare for the journey, to make sure her bike was in good shape, to make sure she had the right equipment, to help her plot out a route. And when he went and talked to his parents, all they did was worry that he was going to get hurt. And like, he might get hurt, because people get hurt. But they didn't understand that they were choosing between the hurt that he might encounter by going out in the world and having an adventure, let's say with his girlfriend, or the hurt that he would encounter by staying at home, cowering in his basement under the protection of his over-loving parents, while his girlfriend ventured bravely into the world. You think, well, which of those two things is most likely to be damaging? And the answer to that is, well, his parents wouldn't worry as much as if he was in the basement. And that's the wrong worry even, because they should worry more, not less. So in Rule 12 is pet a cat when you encounter one on the street. And it's oddly enough, a meditation on fragility. It's a discussion of what you do when you don't know what to do, and that's really when things have gone badly for you, when you face a terrible tragedy in your own personal life, or in your familial life, or perhaps even in the life of your community, when things come crowding in at you too quickly. In the case of a death in the family, or a terrible illness, or the collapse of a dream, or any of the things that can flip your world upside down, is how do you cope with that? And that chapter contains a discussion of the necessity of narrowing your time frame, because sometimes the right way to look at the world is across years, and sometimes it's across months, and when things are more out of control, perhaps it's across days, and when things are really, when you're really up against the wall, it's across hours or even minutes. And during those minutes, then you concentrate on doing as well as you can with what's right in front of you for the longest unit of time that you can tolerate, conceptualize it. Maybe that's what you do at someone's deathbed, and while you're doing that and suffering away madly, then you also take the time to appreciate everything you can that manifests itself, that allows itself to be appreciated. And so that's the metaphor of the cat, I suppose. And so that's the 12 rules, and I'll return to Rule 1, which is stand up straight with your shoulders back, and I'm going to use it as a platform for laying out the abstractions that I talked to at the beginning of the lecture. So, some of you might be familiar with the central Taoist symbol, and it's a symbol of Tao, and Tao is a very strange word. It doesn't have an easily translatable single meaning, at least in English. It means a variety of things. It means the path of life, so that would mean the path that you take as you move forward through life. But it would mean more also the proper path. So it's the proper path through life. So the idea, Tao is a symbol of reality. And one of the things it means is the path you take through life. And so there's an implicit idea there that the fundamental reality of life is the path you take through life. It's not a materialist idea. It's a different kind of idea. It's the idea that life is a journey. We're mobile creatures, and we're on a journey. And the best way to conceptualize reality is as the place that you journey through. And the question is, well, what are the elements, what are the constituent elements of the place that you journey through? Because that's also part of Tao, and the Taoists believe that that's yin and yang. Yin is the black serpent, because those are two serpents head to head that make up the totality of the world. And the black serpent is yin, and yin is feminine, classically speaking, from the Taoist perspective. It's a symbolic representation. It doesn't mean that women are yin and that men aren't. It's not that. It's an attempt to use sexual symbolism to represent a deeper underlying reality. And yang is masculine, yin is dark and night. And there's a white dot in the black serpent, and there's a black dot in the white serpent. The white serpent is the daytime and masculine, and it's the interplay between those two things that make up reality. And one can transform into the other at any moment. And so that's the Taoist idea of reality. And so there's yin and yang, and they make up the world. And the question is, perhaps our question is, well, what exactly does that mean? Well, it actually means something. It's a kind of abstraction. And it's actually an incredibly helpful abstraction, once you understand the abstraction. It might be the most real abstraction there is. So I'm going to lay out a little bit, I'll lay out for you a little bit about what these two domains refer to. And then I'm going to make a case that they're real. And then I'm going to tell you what it means that they're real. So you could think of yin as chaos. Now we need to know what chaos is. Now, chaos is what God made the world out of at the beginning of time. So one of the things that chaos is it's something like potential. And so you can imagine, and this is not how we think as modern people, because we tend to think in a materialist way, but it is how we act. And as I said already, you act as if you confront potential. And you treat potential as if it's real, and if your attitude towards it confers on you a certain moral obligation, which is why you know what people mean when they say you're not living up to your potential. No one ever says, well, what do you mean by potential? Not unless they're being argumentative, because you already know. And very few people say, well, I'm fully living up to my potential. So you admit to the reality that undergirds that the conception that makes that question a possibility immediately. The potential is, well, potential is the future. That's part of it. And we believe in the future. We believe that it exists, even though it isn't here and it's not measurable. It only exists as a potential set of realizable possibilities. That's what the future is. And it's really what we contend with. We don't really contend with the present precisely. We orient ourselves towards the future, and the future comes at us from every direction. And we decide as we encounter the future which parts of it we're going to interact with and how we're going to construct the present and the past as a consequence of doing that. And so part of chaos is potential, and that's the positive part. It's like if you're in a bind, what you look for is potential. Is there another way of conceptualizing this? Do I have a different way of acting? Can I make another plan? Is there something that I'm not taking into account that would make this terrible situation tolerable? That's all an attempt to call upon potential and to use it to transfigure a reality that's intolerable. And maybe it's intolerable because of the way you're conceptualizing it. Now, I'm not being naive about that. I understand perfectly well that people can find themselves so badly cornered in life that they're basically done no matter what they do. People obviously develop fatal illnesses and they die and their businesses collapse, and genuinely terrible things can happen to you that aren't your fault, that you can't fix. I'm not saying that you can just gerrymander the world by changing your attitude. It's not that straightforward. But I am saying that you have a tremendous ability to transform the landscape of possibility that reveals itself in front of you, and that when things are terrible, that's your best bet. Doesn't mean it will succeed. It just means you don't have a better option. And so chaos, that potential, is also something that manifests itself in a terrible manner. So imagine this is a good way of thinking about it. So imagine that you have an intimate relationship. Let's say a marriage. And the marriage is predicated on trust and fidelity, which is a variant of trust. And that the trust and fidelity is an axiom of your memories.
Hey, we got relative deliberation, bartender, jumping off. Deprivation. Relative deprivation, whatever that means. How could deprivation be relative? The fuck, nothing from nothing leave nothing. Right? Nothing from nothing leave nothing. So,
Relative deprivation is the lack of resources to sustain the diet, lifestyle, activities and amenities that an individual or group are accustomed to, or that are widely encouraged or approved in the society to which they belong. Measuring relative deprivation allows an objective comparison between the situation of the individual or group compared to the rest of society. Relative deprivation may also emphasize the individual experience of discontent when being deprived of something to which one believes oneself to be entitled. However, emphasizing the perspective of the individual makes objective measurement problematic. It is a term used in social sciences to describe feelings or measures of economic, political, or social deprivation that are relative rather than absolute. The term is inextricably linked to the similar terms poverty and social exclusion. The concept of relative deprivation has important consequences for both behavior and attitudes, including feelings of stress, political attitudes, and participation in collective action. It is relevant to researchers studying multiple fields in social sciences. It has sometimes been related to the biological concept of relative fitness, where an organism that successfully outproduces its competitors leaves more copies in their gene pool. Social scientists, particularly political scientists and sociologists, have cited relative deprivation, especially temporal relative deprivation, as a potential cause of social movements and deviance, leading in extreme situations to political violence such as rioting, terrorism, civil war.
Hey, they talking about this some kind of competition who gonna have the most babies and people, right? No, hell no. Well, why is that? We ain't in no race to see who can overpopulate the world. We're in a race to have the quality of life improved. I'm in the quality of life improvement movement, not the overpopulate the world movement.
Wars and other instances of social deviance such as crime. For
Lock us
example,
all up
some
in
scholars
jail.
of social movements explain their rise
Escape
by
from New
citing
York.
grievances of people who feel deprived of what they perceive as values
That's
to
a
which
movie.
they are entitled. Similarly, individuals engage in deviant behaviors when their means do not match their goals. Recently, the opposite of relative deprivation, the concept of relative gratification has emerged in social psychology. Feelings of deprivation are relative.
They programming you and telling you what the TV said how you supposed to be living, and that's supposed to be your lifestyle. And they bring causing a guilt complex and all other kind of scientific side effects, emotional, mental side effects.
As they come from a comparison to social norms that are not absolute and usually differ from time and place. This differentiates relative deprivation
Hey,
from
damn, they
objective
talking about the TV
deprivation,
set, too.
also known as absolute deprivation or
How it's
absolute
brainwashing
poverty,
people.
a condition that applies to all underprivileged people. This leads to an important conclusion. While the objective deprivation, poverty, in the world may change over time, relative deprivation will not, as long as social inequality persists and some humans are better off than others. Consider the following examples. In 1905, cars were a luxury, hence an individual unable to afford one would not feel or be viewed as deprived. In 2010, when cars are common in most societies, an individual unable to afford one is much more likely to feel deprived. In another example, mobile phones are common today, and many people may feel that they deserve to have one. 50 years ago, when there were no mobile phones, such a sentiment would obviously not exist. Relative deprivation may be temporal. That is, it can be experienced by people that experience expansion of rights or wealth, followed by stagnation or reversal of those gains. Such phenomena are also known as unfulfilled rising expectations. In an example from the political realm, the lack of the right to vote is more likely to be felt as a deprivation by people who had it once than by the people who never had the opportunity to vote. Some sociologists, for instance Karl Polanyi, have argued that relative differences in economic wealth are more important than absolute deprivation, and that it is more significant in determining human quality of life. This debate has important consequences for social policy,
The quality of
particularly
life.
on whether poverty can be eliminated simply by raising total wealth, or whether egalitarian measures are also needed. A specific form of relative deprivation is relative poverty. A measure of relative poverty defines poverty as being below some relative poverty line, such as households who earn less than 20% of the median income.
Think it ain't legal
Critique
yet.
of this theory has pointed out that this theory fails to explain why some people who feel discontent fail to take action and join social movements. Counter-arguments include that some people are prone to conflict avoidance, are short-term oriented, and that imminent life difficulties may arise since there is no guarantee that life improvement will result from social action.
Life improvement, y'all. The quality of life. Let's try this again. For failures in educational purposes, do women